recording is on. Floor is yours. Go ahead.
All right. Great. So this is going to be on how old this house is. So this is a very light presentation, but as far as home inspectors go, maybe not as much as realtors, but definitely for home inspectors, knowing that the age of a house is paramount to us. It's the be all and end all. We must know. Ideally, we like to get to the exact age of the house, or at least within the era of the house, and we'd like to get down to at least a 10-year range if possible. And as we go through the presentation, you'll have a better idea of an understanding of why you need to know the age of the house. Again, I think both Kathy and Mike's been doing most of my presentations. This is the team, myself, 2 full-time inspectors, Christine, full-time taking the bookings. And again, we basically, if you're willing to drive there to do a listing or to purchase, so are we. Again, you'll see my QR code every so often. If you want to get your camera out and hit that on occasion, it will load all my details into your phones. And let's get started on this course. So again, all these seminars are designed for you to serve your clients better. Impress the heck out of them is what I usually say. You should always be selling yourself just like I am. And the more information that you know as a realtor, the more you're hammering home that they pick the correct realtor for the job. We should always remember we have to improve ourselves continuously. And as we get older, we do forget things, so we do need refresher courses. So we're going to look at 2 general techniques here. One, items that may have a date stamp on them to try and identify the age of a house. The other one is usually when we're dealing with anything, let's say, pre-1960s build, we may not be able to do the stamp date verification as much as we may have to look at the type of construction for that house to try and guide us into a better time frame of when the house was built. You'll see the note on the bottom, architectural styles. Years ago, we probably could use the type of architectural style of a house to maybe indicate what era it was built in, but with the way we can build homes today, we can make any home look like a brownstone type home or a Victorian style home. So we don't usually use that model as much. So, you know, it's like if you went in and saw a 1950s kitchen. I mean, there's certain things you will see. We're going to cross-reference different types of techniques that we're going to use. And these next few I'm going to be showing you are going to be some of the what I call the meat and potatoes of what we do. And when I start showing you how we can date windows and stuff like this, you're going to understand that when you're doing listings, and I think this is something that I'm going to spend a couple of minutes on, because as a listing agent, you're excited that you got the deal. Oh, great. You know, I've got a house I'm going to list. You're all excited. You sit down with the clients at the kitchen table and you say, tell me as much as you can about the house. And they start telling you, we upgraded the windows 2 years ago. We did the roof 5 years ago. We did this, we did that, we did the other. And you're writing all this information down. But what you have to understand is as we get older, time gets away on us. And one of the stories I always give is I tell my kids, oh, I remember when we went to Cuba 5 years ago. And then my daughter will say, Dad, I was 12, I'm 20 now. You know, it's not that I was lying. I thought it was 5 years ago. And the same thing happens to clients when they do renovations. So what I'm going to come back to here is, if you cannot prove that the windows were replaced 2 years ago, or the roof was replaced 5 years ago, or the extension put on the back of the house was 5 or 8 years ago, I would sooner you put in the listing, you know, updated kitchen, updated windows, okay, newer roof shingles, unless you know exactly the date. Because if you go with what they say and you say windows replaced in 2018, and I noticed that the windows were done in 2015, I'm not going to tell your clients it was 2015. However, if your clients were happen to say, Gary, these windows were replaced in 2018, and I see that they were actually replaced in 2015, I'll tell them it was 2015. But now what happens is they have a bad taste in their mouth that what else is wrong with this listing. So as a listing agent, please, if you don't know the exact date, better to go a little bit more generic, okay? And that's a very important point, and you will come across it, okay? So let's look at some basic techniques. Manhole covers, sewer grates, sidewalk walks. Sidewalks, number 3, I don't really like that one because any new sidewalk put down will have a newer date and it could throw you off. These next 2 techniques are probably the meat and potatoes for a home inspector, okay? Is we'll look at the manhole covers or the sewer grates. And if you zoom in, there, 1987. Now, these don't wear out very often, okay? They're steel, they're not going to wear out, cast iron, whatever. So when we see that the sewage drains were put in 1987, we know that that subdivision was likely built within 1 to 2 years of the drains being put in most cases. So right off the bat, I'm thinking 1988 build. So that's already told me a lot of information that I know what happened in the 80s on an 80s build, okay? So depending when I'm looking at the roof, you know, if I saw 1987 and I was doing the inspection in 1995, I'm thinking, hey, this is an 8-year-old roof. Okay, I know that. It may look like a 12-year wear, but I know roughly the age. So 1989. This literally is probably the go-to areas that we get the age of a house in a lot of cases and most cases, okay? So nice and simple. Now, not all drains have the date stamps on it, okay? But many do. But if I was to look at this straight away, I'm thinking it's a newer build, right? I know it's a newer build straight off the bat. They're new trees, okay? There's no mature trees here. So right off the bat, I know it's a newer build area, okay? Going in here, 2000 and built. You look at this, you think, you can tell it's an older home. Nice mature trees, okay? I also know it's a solid brick build, okay? I'm already building a portfolio in my head of what the age is. If you're lucky enough that the drains haven't been replaced, 1910, okay? So we know it's a start of the last century, okay? So 1910 build, you know it's going to be right in around that age. This is absolutely the go-to area for us as home inspectors, okay? But when we are dealing with anything pre-1950s, quite often drains may have been replaced and they may have replaced the covers. So we always get to our inspections usually 30 minutes before the time. So if it's a 10 o'clock inspection, we usually get there at 9:30. We like that 30 minutes downtime for ourselves. We usually take the drones up, get all the roof pictures. We'll walk around the outside of the house, typically before you turn up. But if we ever get to a job closer to the time and you see us, you know, 30, 40 yards walking down the street, one, we may be getting a perspective of the older house at a distance, which you need to do as an inspector. But we may also be going to the closest manhole cover, which happens to be, you know, 20, 30 yards down the street. And that's typically what we're doing down there. So we see something like this, it's great. It's already given me the idea of when it was, that area was built up. This next one, I'm not a lover of this one, but this one, 2001, you will see some stamps, but I wouldn't really use that as a go-to item for me, but you will see it in some areas. So again, construction style, not as much. You know, mature trees is basically just telling us it's an older area, not giving us the age of the home. But obviously we see new planted trees, it's a newer build. But the manhole covers, the sewer grates, they're a real two. And I would tell you that this probably works 8 times out of 10. This will work for us on an inspection, okay? Now, this is only given as an idea of the year. Once we get into the house, typically we will confirm the exact year the house was built by some of the other techniques I'm going to show you. But before I start my inspection, I'm already within a couple of years in my head of when the home was built. And again, the reason we want to know the age of the house is it tells us what extra things we have to be aware of. Now, we're always aware of all products that we use in a building area. But, you know, I'm not worried about finding asbestos, you know, in a 1990s plus build, right? I'm not worried about finding knob and tube in 1960s homes, 1970s homes, okay? But I am looking at asbestos flooring, okay? So the age of the house tells us as an inspector what we're anticipating to see and what we know we're not going to see, okay? So these things here, the toilet trick, the window trick, okay, the breaker panel, the heating system. So what does all this mean? I could use this to date the age of the house. If you take the top cover off and you zoom in, there's a date stamp. Not in all toilets. Some of them also have it on the lid, on the underside of the lid itself. Sometimes it'll have the exact year. This one actually, the year here is the 00 for a 2000. It's not the 03, the 02. They do the year first. But where this can help you is, let's say they built on an extension, and on that extension they added a 2-piece bathroom or a 3-piece bathroom. By knowing the age of that toilet, you know when the extension was done, right? If I've got a 2001 toilet, but the house was built in 1980, and I find it in the basement, then they likely finished that basement in 2001, right? And the same goes with windows. If they've added a conservatory on the back and the windows have a date on it, you now know when that conservatory was built based on the age of the windows in most cases. So this can also help you on your listings. So like I spent that first 3 or 4 minutes talking about when you list a house, it's very important to get the information correct. And I would really advise keeping away from specific year dates, because as I said before, if it's wrong, the buyer just has a little bit of a bad taste in their mouths that they lied and the windows are 3 years older. It doesn't matter that there's nothing wrong with the windows. They still feel like, they lied, and what else have they lied about? And we don't want to get into that situation. So please, as a listing agent, just make it generic if you can't confirm the exact age when updates were done in a home, okay? So what do we see on windows? When we're dealing with a thermal window, not when there's a rubber strip between the thermal, but when there's a metal or when there's a vinyl, sometimes we can see the date. Now the date's not 9137, the date is the 83, it's a 1983 window. Well, if I saw that the drains outside were 81 or 82, then I know the house was built pretty much in 83, okay? So windows are one of those products that are not stored for a long time, okay? They're basically built to order for the homes. Opposed to when we're dealing with air conditioners and furnaces, they can be in stock for 2 or 3 years. And the dates usually on air conditioners and furnaces are hidden in such a way that the regular consumer cannot tell the age of a furnace, because people would get upset if I was buying a new air conditioner today and I realized at a 1999 build, even though it's brand new. I'm going to feel, hey, it's 2 years old. It's still brand new. It's just been sat in a warehouse for 2 years. But air conditioners and furnaces, they can stock them for long periods of time. So they usually hide the date. If there's a rubber seal, you're not going to find a date stamp, so don't try. You will find them on the plastic trims on the inside. Some of them will have a little digital date stamp on them as well. But not all windows will have a date stamp, even if they do have the aluminum strip inside, but many do. We also, if we look at the electrical panel, sometimes the carry-on warranty stickers are right there. So this is 1976. Okay, so the new home warranty program. So we can find it on electrical panels. This is not put on there often. Certain builders do, but it is another way that you can see when the house was built, when the electrical panel was installed. Another go-to area for us, which I would say when I started, I said the meat and potatoes for us would be the manhole covers and the storm drains. Absolutely. The second one for us to tie in the exact age of the house would be looking at the gas ticket or the soap tag when they put the furnace in. Now, a soap tag or a gas ticket, legally by law, can never be removed. So even if you go through 3 furnaces and they put the soap tags on, they're all supposed to stay. Now they can wear out, they can fall off, and absolutely. but by law, they're supposed to all stay on and you're not supposed to remove them. So in many cases on anything, let's say definitely probably post 1970s, we will see an original soap tag. And that will also tell us when the house was built. So in this one, 1985, okay, is the original tag. So again, this is probably the next go-to that we use to identify the exact age of a house. So all these areas, breaker panels, the furnaces, the windows, the toilets. Again, the windows and the toilets, I usually, it is a good way if someone's done a renovation, okay, or they've done an extension. It's a good way to be able to back up when they said they did the work they did in the home. So wiring types. So now we're going to be looking at construction materials that were used to let us know when a house was built. So typically we're going to be using this when we can't confirm it from the previous items that I've showed you. So now we've got to look at construction materials to try and get us into usually an era of a home being built, but we're not likely going to get down to the exact year the house was built. We may be getting into, you know, early 1950s, mid 1950s, late 50s, mid 40s, something like that. So knob and tube wiring, ungrounded wiring and aluminum wiring. I'm going to touch on all these three areas right now. So right up to when the home started to be built, up to the mid 1940s, usually around 45, maybe 46, we would have knob and tube wiring. One thing you have to understand about knob and tube wiring is it's not illegal to have knob and tube wiring. However, insurance companies, I don't know of one today that will insure a new insurance on knob and tube. So people say, yeah, I have insurance on knob and tube. That's fine. But when you sell your house, the next people moving in are likely not going to be able to find insurance for knob and tube, which means a full replacement. But if we find knob and tube, we know it's pre, 1945. We still do see quite a bit of knob and tube wiring even today, believe it or not. But it's usually not the entire house. It's usually maybe the upper floors that they had more difficulty in trying to run the wiring, so they left it. When we look at non-grounded wiring, so this is a standard grounded plug. When you see the plugs that only have the two prongs, okay, they don't have the grounding one, we know it's basically at the end of the knob and tube, so usually around, excuse me, 1945, 46 through to about 58. So again, it puts us into about, it was only used for about 10 or 12 years. So it's a good way for us to get into the decade that the homes were built. Now with non-grounded wiring, insurance companies today are almost looking at it and treating it the same as knob and tube wire. And in a lot of cases, they are asking to pull new wire, pull new grounding wire. So with non-grounded wire, you will likely, in most cases, have to rewire the home the same as you would if it was knob and tube. When we look at aluminum wiring, 1965, 66 through to about 76, 77 on the top end. Now, I've got a presentation, I believe, I may have sent it to Matthew, but I'll check. I've got a presentation strictly on aluminum wiring and Kitech plumbing. Okay, it's about a 30 to 40 minute presentation, but I'm going to explain everything you need to know on Kitech plumbing and everything you need to know on aluminum wiring in one presentation. And I think we'll be scheduling that later in the fall. But basically, if we've got aluminum wiring, we know we're between 65, 66 through to about 76, 77. Okay, so again, we're getting it into a 10-year period of when the homes were built. There's nothing wrong with aluminum wiring. You do not have to rewire a house with aluminum wiring. It is perfectly safe once a few changes have been done to the outlets if they're not the correct outlets. Okay, so again, don't be frightened. Aluminum wiring is perfectly safe, but there is a couple of steps you have to take. And again, I'll spend about 15-20 minutes on aluminum wiring on another presentation. But again, aluminum wiring, 10-year period, 65, 66 through to about 76, 77. Plumbing materials, lead, galvanized steel, which we don't see a lot of, but we still see it on occasion, and obviously copper. And the waste drains, we're going to look at cast iron, copper, and plastic. Again, these are all items for trying to date a home. So lead water mains can be a little bit difficult to get access to it if we've seen it coming from the street. But we're trying to look at the pipe work that comes upstream. So basically from the street to the house, okay? So lead water mains indicates pre-1930 construction. So I see lead coming into the house, it's pre-1930s. So, you know, I haven't identified if it's 1910 or 1920s, but you know, I do know it's before 1930s. And how do you identify? If you see this bulbous end right here, okay, basically, once it heats up, we always get this bulbous end on lead. Plus, if you did happen to have a magnet that we all carry on our inspections, it's non-magnetic. So lead is non-magnetic, where galvanized is magnetic. So galvanized steel pipes, we see them, but very, very few now. Most, if they're out there, would have failed. But you know, one of my guys did find one, some galvanized in Acton a couple of weeks ago in an older home. But basically 1920s through to 1950s. And the reason we don't use galvanized is they do corrode. They corrode. They only had a life of about 50 years. So you can imagine if we're still seeing them today, some of them can be 100 years old. But if you've got really bad water flow, you could have some galvanized there because they corrode from the inside out as well. So it will have a lot less water flow. But we don't see a lot of galvanized anymore. But like I said, that being said, one of my guys did find it in Acton just the other week. And again, here's some more galvanized steel. And of course, what we're using today, copper and plastic. So looking at main drains, so your sewage stacks, okay, cast iron, copper, and obviously the plastic that we're using today, ABS, PVC, whatever. So cast iron would predate 1960s. We still see a lot of cast iron. We will make a note that they are getting obsolete, but they do last a long time. But they are getting more obsolete today. And if you were to replace a cast iron stack, because you know it goes right through floor after floor after floor, it can be rather expensive. But again, if we see it, we know it's pre-1960s. Copper. Copper's a good one for us because it was only used for a very short period of time. So again, the same as if we identify aluminum wiring, we've basically got a 10-year span. We're almost the same when we see copper. We know it's, you know, mid 50s through to 68. It's actually a little earlier, probably more closer to about 66. And you know, copper spiked in price in the mid 60s, which is also one of the other reasons we went to aluminum wiring. But if we do see copper, again, it puts us within a 10-year period of when that house was built, which isn't too bad. And of course, today, pretty much exclusively we're using plastic. Some custom homes still choose to use cast iron because they are quieter, but not many. So again, knob and tube, grounding, aluminum, these are all given us within eras. So knob and tube pre-1945, ungrounded, getting us into a 10-year period, the same as aluminum wiring, the same as copper. So all these things is, if we can identify when we go in, these are items we're going to use as inspectors to know what era the house was if we can't find those key identifiers. But basically, any home that we inspect, I would say, you know, mid 60s onwards, we will pretty much get the exact year the house was built. Anything pre 1950s is a little bit more difficult to get the exact year down. But we will get you within usually within 10 years typically. Now, some interior finishes that can also help is if we could look at plaster, drywall, gypsum, lath. So plaster used up to 1960s. Now, just let you know, this area, these are called keys, Keys, just like a key to open a car. These are called keys. So as we push the plaster in, so sometimes people will say, why do big chunks of plaster fall off the wall? That's because this key breaks off, and it's this key that's holding on a big chunk of plaster on the other side. And when that breaks off, that's why we get chunks of plaster that can drop off of the walls. But again, plaster pre-1960s. Also, what would tell us here is the rounded corners. That being said, the rounded corners are coming back today. But typically we'd have the rounded corners when we're using plaster or lath and plaster. This is also common that we see. We also know this is a plaster ceiling. So gypsum lath. Gypsum lath is still a plaster. It's just a different technique that we used from the 30s to the 60s. 16-inch centers, but it's pretty much the same process. It's just that we didn't use the batten boards when we were pushing on the plaster. And when we look at regular drywall, sharper corners, fewer curves, but it also obviously sounds different. If you were to knock, nice and hollow. Otherwise, it has a different thud when we're tapping on the walls to see if it's plaster or not. Now, for us as inspectors, as long as it's in good condition, it's irrelevant to us if it's plaster or drywall. Foundation materials, again, we can be looking at stone and rubble, okay, right up to 1930s. Brick foundations, a very short period, a 20-year period basically for brick foundation walls. Concrete block, 1930s to present, but in most cases today, poured concrete is what we're dealing with. So here's a stone and rubble wall. This is a brick foundation, so it goes all the way to the foundation, all the way up through the exterior walls. But again, a 20-year period. And then, of course, poured concrete today, which is pretty much exclusively used. Again, some custom homes may still be using block, but in most cases, poured concrete is what we're using today. These are one of the real early concrete blocks that started. But did you see how they actually made it look like a stone and rubble? It's got that unique look that they put in there. These are the very, very early blocks that we started to use. Now, when we look at brick walls, we've got solid masonry. We used up to mid-1960s, maybe about 68. And now pretty much exclusively, we don't use solid brick masonry walls anymore. We use brick veneer. And we actually tell your clients the difference between solid brick and brick veneer because we do get step cracking. So even though we look at a house that is looks like it's solid brick, we will tell clients it's a brick veneer, tell them the difference between it, just because if they do start getting some step cracking, we don't want them to call us thinking that there's some structural damage when really a step cracking on a brick veneer is just basically cosmetic. We're going to seal it up to stop any extra moisture going through, where cracking on a solid masonry needs to be addressed because it is structural. So this is solid masonry. Okay, you can see how we turn the bricks the opposite way to tie in. Okay, this is a solid brick one again. And this is a brick veneer, okay, which is pretty much what we use. So again, we could take all this brick down. The house still stands because it's a single brick with a wood frame behind. Okay, we also see here that we've got the weeping holes. We could look at subfloors. Subfloors is, again, giving us an idea. It's not the go-to thing for us, but I just want you guys to understand the difference with planks, plywood, wafer board, or OSB board, as we call it today. Again, usually late 60s, maybe 68. Okay. You'll also notice that in the GTA area anyway, we're not talking about going out to Cambridge and stuff like this, but in the GTA area, we basically stopped building bungalows in the mid to late 60s. And basically, especially in Mississauga, the amount of townhouses we have built in the 70s, okay, a tremendous amount. Well, basically, land prices spiked, so we're not building bungalows, and that's basically that's why bungalows weren't built after the late 60s. Land prices. We built townhouses, we'll build semis, we build detached two stories, but we're not wasting all that land on bungalows. So you'll still see bungalows in the further outskirts being built in the 70s and the 80s because the land prices weren't as high as in the GTA. But that really, when the construction all changed, was the late 60s. So here's just another shot of your subfloors. Plywood changed in the late 60s through to the 80s. Then we went to the OSB board that we use today, or the wafer board. But we still do use plywood today. And the wafer board or the OSB board, anything built, the early OSB boards that we used in the early 80s through to the mid 90s were, my house was built in 1981. The 80s, between you and I would never tell your clients this, but the building period, like the early 80s through to the mid 90s, was an awful building period. The new OSB boards that they use today, they have stiffened them up. They're a lot stiffer today. But like I say, that 15-year period using this at the beginning, a little bit bouncy, a little bit more deflection in them than I would like. So, and we always associate a solid house being with something that feels solid. Well, unfortunately, you walk in, well, before I changed all my flooring, but originally, if you walked into my house, you feel like you're on a little bit of a springboard. If you like got a little bit of a spring in your step. But the new OSB boards today are definitely hands above what we used to use in the 80s to the mid 90s. So again, I've already covered this. The areas I covered there with the toilet trick and the windows, this is stuff you want to use to know when renovations may have been done or extensions to a house. So I'm not going to rehash over that. And that's about it, guys. I appreciate your time. It's just kind of a refresher course. It's a night light presentation, this one.
Oh, perfect. Thanks very much, Gary. So we actually got a couple questions for you.
Sure.
So first one, if a house has been completely renovated, redone, maybe even potentially rebuilt, how do you then determine the age? Because all the things you've kind of been showing us, you know, would have been new or redated or upgraded.
Yeah,
but
well,
are there any?
yeah. So yeah, we're still going to be able to know when a house was built from the gas tag, from you know, from other indicators. There's going to be identifiers there between all that I've gone through to know when the new build was done. Now we will say, if they've used part of, which we do often see, that they'll use part of the existing foundation or footprint, and then they may add on. I mean, that's happening a lot in Toronto where the bungalows are, because they're building these big, massive homes. We will know when it was built from those techniques. And we will typically say a rebuild if we know they use the existing footprint. So we would actually say when the new rebuild was, and say it was a rebuild. But we would absolutely, definitely know when that house was rebuilt. There's no question.
Perfect. So the next question is more on the lines of red flag renovations. And what they mean by this is there are certain places where you can obviously, you know, determine the age. Some place like the MPAC Public Records
absolutely
generally have an actual year of when the house was built. But if it's, you know, a 20, 30, 40-year-old home, which has then subsequently seen considerable renovations. What are some of the you know, renovations that you've seen that are commonplace over the last few decades that should send up some pretty big red flags that will, you know, basically either turn a client off of a property or you'd have to warn them that, you know, this type of renovation would lead to some significant costs down the road?
Okay, well, if we know that a support post has been removed, and we can often see this when someone maybe put a pool table in the basement and they didn't like the metal post being there and they've been removed. Now, there's ways we can see if it's been removed. It take a long time to explain different ways, but we can see that some support posts have been removed. Now, a lot of people are doing open plans. So when we see an open plan and everything's sealed in on the ceiling, we can't tell. It doesn't mean they haven't put a support beam in, but we can't tell you if they put a support beam in. But we're not going to flag it, because if we were to tell your clients everything that could be, no one would ever buy a house, right? We know they've done an open plan here. We can only assume they've put the support beam in, but we can only report on what we can see. Now, the good thing when we're doing bungalows, we have a chance to get into the attic. It's sometimes a lot easier for us to know if something's a support or not once we're in the attic as well. But red flags are no difference to a renovation as it would be on a new build. If someone's put updated all their plumbing, did they update it with Kitec plumbing? That's something we'd be able to tell. But as long as the renovation looks okay and there's no red flags, but if we know a support walls, I mean, I've taken 2 support walls out in my house, nobody would know. Okay, it's done the right way. But I know they've been taken out. I know the correct beams have been put in. But can we tell that when we're there? No, we can't. Not if it's been drywalled over. I mean, they may have the bulkhead in there and you have to assume, but now if we went around and told everyone what we thought, we will only pull the trigger when we know, or if it's a very good indicator that wasn't done correct. So we will often see support posts put in with, and I just know there's no footing underneath it. Well, you can't put a support post in without a footing. So we would be saying temporary, appears to be a temporary support post. Okay, support posts need a footing, needs to be confirmed, right? So things like that. If the best rule of thumb, and if with the amount of inspections we do in a year, typically the rule of thumb is if something doesn't look right in the electrical panel, it likely isn't, because the amount we see in a day, suddenly something just looks obscure and you pull your head back, then likely it isn't, and then we'd further investigate. But renovations, we look at them the same as anything else. We have to do an overall look, but if something's hidden, then it's hidden and we can't find it.
Gotcha. And the last one here was about the actual, year of a year of the house was built and places to find that. And we cover that. One of those places is Impact Public Records, but
Yeah.
it's not always updated. And it's not always updated when a new house is like completely gutted, completely renovated, or completely torn down, and rebuilt. Is there any other publicly accessible or accessible to realtors, another site or place that they can find the exact year? Because some of the places just give date ranges, so like it's between 15 to 30 years old. But are there any places other than Impact that give the exact year that you can
Uh,
think of?
I don't know any, because I don't use MPAC anyway. We do everything ourselves visually. Like I don't know ahead of time what age of the home I'm going to. We do it all on site.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I wouldn't know that. But I've never understood why the date ranges on listings are so wide. I mean, every
They're
time.
massive.
I
Yeah,
know
that
it makes
15-year
no
date
sense
range is
to me.
quite useless.
Yeah, I don't know why it's in there. I mean, I mean, again, it doesn't matter to us when it was built. We just need to know, because just telling us more stuff that we may be investigating, right? I mean, we're still investigating anyway, but like I say, I'm not looking for knob and tube on a 1960s house, right? I'm not necessarily looking for a aluminum wiring on a house built in 1980s, right? I mean, we're still going to identify what it is, but there's just certain things like I'm not taking outlets covers off on anything that I know is not aluminum wiring. But as soon as I know the house was built late 60s through to the mid 70s, I'm taking covers off the outlets to see if they've got the correct Kolar outlets, or they've been pigtailed or something like that. But I'm not going to waste our time taking those covers off something that is not aluminum wiring era, right?
That's fair. And this is just as a side note for people who are going to be agents who are going to be doing listings. So the MPAC public records that we've been referring to in this discussion is available through your TREB access. So when you actually are logged into TREB, you're going to see public records as one of your options on that left-hand side menu. And that's what we're referring to as MPAC public records. You can look up property addresses, get some in-depth interior and exterior property information. And also, it's the only place that I know of to actually get the exact year built, so that you can then take that and put that on your listings. So thank you very much, Gary. I appreciate your help. This was an excellent presentation. I'm going to stop the recording here.